Well, we're back for part 2 of week 9, and in this half of the lecture, I want to talk about environmental entrepreneurism. And in environmental entrepreneurism, we're going to be looking at situations where we have a lot of uncertainty, the control, and that comes from being able to put this into a market situation, and then a low alignment of values. And the components of these environmental problems, like I just said, are uncertainty, value mismatch, but some degree of control. And the way environmental entrepreneurism works has 4 characteristics. And what I'm going to do here is talk about environmental entrepreneurism. Then I'm going to compare it to the social businesses or social enterprises. I'm going to give a few examples, but mainly talk about the assignments that align with these, and then briefly say, well, how science can help the successful environmental entrepreneurism. So environmental entrepreneurism has these 4 characteristics in this sort of very simplified view. First, it deals with a problem, and often that can be stated as a market failure where there's unaccounted for costs or value. There's some sort of value mismatch between individuals in the society or between individuals. And then often there's a scale problem, that the available solutions are not appropriate for the scale, for the physical scale, often such as a bunch of small problems, or that the time scale it doesn't quite line up. And we saw this with the scale problem with the introductory video where I talked about GoBox. There was a whole bunch of vendors and a whole bunch of people, and it took an entrepreneur to get in there and solve the waste problem. And then environmental entrepreneurism deals with more than just profit or return on investment. It deals with the social impact, and I'm going to amplify that a little bit later. And it does that by presenting a value proposition. So here's the problem, here's how we can get value out of it, and this is what people would pay to do that, and you're going to use a business platform to help solve the problem. Entrepreneurism is really good at handling uncertainty. The problems and the solutions are constantly changing, requiring continuous learning, and this allows, if you allow consumers and entrepreneurs to interact in a market, it's a very dynamic situation that allows to help change, and at any point you can employ new innovations and change and adapt to that. So entrepreneurism is often closely associated with innovation and new ideas. As such, it requires a different set of infrastructure and fundamental operations. So this means different than the traditional firms or governments, NGOs, or philanthropy that might be addressing some of these same questions. And it works best when there's clear incentives and freedom to innovate, and that means specifying the outcomes rather than the methods. Now, in environmental protection, we often specify both the outcomes and the methods that are going to be used to, say, clean up a situation. Certain methods that have been approved, and those are best management practices. This can interfere with the implementation of entrepreneurism. Now, if you know that the best management practice really is the best and it's the most efficient and cheapest, then it turns that instead of an entrepreneurial situation, it turns it into an optimization, management situation where you have enough knowledge and you have enough control in order to operate. And these, the infrastructure that you're working with is often a peer-to-peer or distributed network. So it's not really a hierarchical or simple top-down structure that would allow one type of solution to be imposed or implemented across a large area. And finally, like I alluded to before, the definition of success includes social goals, as we're trying to have employment or we're trying to clean up the environment so that people don't get sick. These are not just profit margins or profit motives, but they can be people can realize a good profit and make a good living by addressing these questions. And because of that, because it includes social goals, often you have to use a different sort of accounting, like a dashboard or some triple bottom line approaches that are being used. These are ways to account for the different aspects of the project. And the Mode 2 science, so we discussed earlier in the course, this idea that there's a high degree of uncertainty how you deal with it. Mode 2 science is really a nice fit with thinking about entrepreneurial problems. Okay, now this point about social and environmental entrepreneurship, there is a type of entrepreneurship that's called environmental capitalism, and it's creating new approaches to do things efficiently or make more money in it. And I'm more focusing on the ones that have a social outcome. And so these mission-based projects are much more similar to social entrepreneurism than environmental capitalism. Okay, to make that comparison, there's a large body of knowledge on social entrepreneurism, and if we take that and just sort of apply it to environmental problems, we can see that many of these ecological or environmental problems are wicked problems, and there's really no set structure for solving these. And social entrepreneurism is where somebody comes in, figures out how to create value in these uncertain situations, and use that value to drive some sort of market force that provides revenue and covers the cost, does everything that a regular business has to do. We often also see these social entrepreneurs using groups or networks of groups to address a problem, the idea of a grassroots organization. And this is coming out of a grassroots is very effective at choosing key problems that matter to people, and also to use that network to help the entrepreneurial firm learn, but also the people that are involved in it. And when we get the collection of all these groups and networks has been seen as a movement, and this is NGOs and philanthropy and environmental entrepreneurism all working together toward this sort of broad movement of environmental goals. So the reason I wanted to make this point is that you might be more familiar with social entrepreneurism or social enterprises, and this type of social and environmental entrepreneurism I'm talking about is in that thread rather than the idea of just trying to make as much money off some widget as you can. Okay, I want to mention a few examples that I've brought up in the class. One is this idea of using solar drip irrigation systems in rural Nicaragua, and I'm just going to explain this briefly here, and you can read these notes later. The idea was by identifying situations in rural Nicaragua where solar panels and a very rudimentary drip irrigation system could work. We could identify those areas, tell the farmers about it, tell the people in town that ran a store about it, and when those two groups got together, there was the opportunity for commerce, and then the incentive for the store to start looking for more places to sell the drip irrigation, and incentive for the farmers to look for properties that met these criteria. So this is the idea of using some sort of information, augmenting the information available in order to help the individual farmer and the small store connect. Another example of this is of a possible environmental entrepreneurism solution to a large problem is to try to use floating treatment wetlands for lake restoration. This has been used in small ponds and lakes, and the idea would be, again, setting the criteria that will provide certain incentives for cleaning up some aspect of the lake, whether that's removing phosphorus or decreasing the turbidity, whatever those are, provide that sort of monetary reward as the incentive, and let people establish floating wetlands or shoreline wetlands, whatever it takes in order to get paid to meet that criteria. And in this situation, again, there's the opportunity for individual entrepreneurs, acting as like independent agents, but also for some sort of co-op to link these entrepreneurs together, sort of like you saw with the Go Box example again, where you have a brokering of between a large number of companies and the people. In this case, because of the permitting processes and monitoring processes that are can be onerous for a small individual or a small company to have a co-op do that, would provide that information infrastructure that could help this type of entrepreneurism take off. Now, these examples of environmental entrepreneurism, what I want you to think about are these 4 aspects: that deals with a problem, handles uncertainty, requires different infrastructure and operation, and that the definition includes social goals. When you look at these information from the Skoll Foundation, where they talk about the definition of entrepreneurism and some examples from deforestation and water and sanitation, and particularly when you view these videos, Majorca Carter talks about eco-entrepreneurism in the inner city and green spaces. There's local seafood entrepreneurs that are harvesting local seafood and bringing it to restaurants, even in a climate where there's decline of the general seafood fishery, and then making money from recycling to upscaling this waste into more fashionable products. So I want you to think about those characteristics of this environmental entrepreneurism when you look at those. Okay, 2 more things. One is that the role of science is, what we're talking about, environmental science and social and environmental entrepreneurship could be a strong force in there. So there's some contributions that we're getting from entrepreneurship, but also for science that could offer to these projects. And a couple obvious contributions are understanding the underlying processes. That's what we do in science, studying, with systems diagrams and scale and all that sort of stuff. And then the other part is to characterize the expected impact of any project. Again, this is risk analysis and toxicity. There's a lot of branches of environmental science that do this. Another contribution we can make is use these scientific methods to explore and try to uncover unintended consequences, using multiple approaches like we've talked about in this class, starting with scenarios and building toward these entrepreneurial solutions, encouraging a broad view but yet looking at very specific details on any particular location, and studying things across scale. These are aspects of environmental science that can help define and make environmental entrepreneurship more successful. And finally, in the situation where you're really dealing with a sticky environmental problem, you're going to have maybe environmental entrepreneurship working right alongside scientific adaptive management, and we're going to see that next week. Okay, in closing for the week, I want to just talk about this claim that good environmental stewardship leads to good governance. And when you address the environmental problems as a community, it can bring the whole community together, and this leads to good governance. There's by being aggressively pluralistic, seeking out new ideas and bringing them in, having an open process like that modeling approach I talked in part 1, revealing shared concern for humans and ecosystems by really explicitly stating values early in the process. All of these help build trust and build a good basis for government action, for good governance. And there's a couple examples. The Greenbelt movement, which we talked about before, where Wangari Maathai won the Nobel Prize for helping people have a business growing trees, which then helped preserve the communities and from the encroaching desert. And the Portland example, which is where there were watershed groups formed, and that translated into a very active citizenry. And Putnam described Portland as one of the as the only city that was moving toward citizen activity instead of citizen isolation. And this, it goes along sort of with Putnam's theory about how good governance evolves, which is it starts with some trust, then some community activity, and then finally commerce. Not the other way around. You don't build commerce first and then trust follows. It was, according to his model, it's the other way around. The other thing is this model, the Portland example, is exportable. In Khabarovsk in Russia, they had a chemical spill into the Amur River, and it was this leakage of benzene in there. And Khabarovsk is in East Russia, and it's also a Portland sister city. So when they had this leak, they were sort of, the bad thing is they're too far away from Moscow to get help, and the good thing, they were too far away from Moscow to get meddled with. And they called on their Portland sister city connection, and they used that local community action in Khabarovsk to identify the problem, monitor the problem, come up with potential solutions, and work on it in a much more local area. Now, I don't want to leave you with the idea that everybody agrees that good environmental stewardship leads to good governance, and there's some good there's some very strong counterclaims that you need to consider that always come up. One is you need to have strong government to have good environmental protection. We've seen this in many areas that have weak governments. They just can't protect the environment from profiteers and other runaway sort of immoral capitalism. The other thing is you need strong bureaucracy to manage complex restoration projects and complex environmental projects, like managing the Klamath Basin or the Columbia River or all of these large projects in the United States that are sort of signature environmental projects. They take a strong bureaucracy. They take competence at all levels of in these organizations. And then there's another one, which is that the environment is only a secondary concern. And this comes up sort of undermining a lot of environmental arguments, which is that you need civil and economic stability before you can worry about the environment, or that the environment is just a first world worry. And Bertolt Brecht said a similar thing, which is first comes a full stomach, then comes ethics, meaning first people need to be fed and comfortable and secure, and then you worry about these other things. And I think that's something to consider. Is the environment just something that we worry about here in Portland and in the United States, or is it really key to a healthy world? And I hope through this course you've seen that it's really some of the poorest people around the world in rural areas and in urban areas that are in direct contact with the environment. Their everyday life is with poor air, unsanitary water, and sort of bad living conditions. That's their environment, and that's really, in order to clean that up, is a combination of social and governance and environment. So I'll just leave you with that thought, and hope you have a chance to look over these notes and explore some of the details.